She made magic with a nose twitch. But off camera, Elizabeth Montgomery's life was anything but enchanted. Behind the dazzling charm of Samantha Stevens, the beloved witch from Bewitched, was a woman quietly battling personal demons, family betrayal, failed marriages, and a string of secrets that would never make it into a sitcom script. And while the world was falling in love with her bubbly persona, Elizabeth was slowly unraveling in private. Haunted by her past, caught in scandals, and searching for a kind of love that always seemed to slip through her fingers. This isn't the fairy tale Hollywood sold us. This is Elizabeth Montgomery, like you've never seen her before. Before Bewitched turned her into a cultural icon, Elizabeth was a child of Hollywood royalty. Her father was the dashing Robert Montgomery, a respected actor with a chillingly cold heart. From the outside, it looked like Elizabeth had everything: wealth, opportunity, and a head start in the business. But the reality was much darker. Her father didn't want her to act. He wanted her silent, traditional, and obedient. He loved the spotlight, but didn't want to share it with his daughter. That icy dynamic would shape nearly every decision Elizabeth made as she tried and failed to earn his approval. And when that approval never came, she rebelled in the most dramatic ways possible. By the time she landed the role of Samantha, Elizabeth had already been through 2 failed marriages, one arranged for status, the other to a man who hid his demons behind a Hollywood smile. Her 3rd marriage was to Bewitched producer Bill Asher, and even that didn't survive the storm. On set, she fell into an affair with one of the show's directors, destroying both their marriages and forever altering her wholesome image. While America was glued to the perfect suburban witch, Elizabeth's real life was crumbling under the weight of passion, secrecy, and scandal. But the heartbreak didn't stop there. Elizabeth was drawn to powerful, sometimes dangerous men. JFK, Elvis, Dean Martin, the whispers never stopped. But behind the rumors were real relationships, some filled with charm, others with manipulation and abuse. And through it all, she kept smiling for the cameras, twitching her nose, and pretending everything was fine. But everything was not fine. She became a quiet trailblazer, standing up for the LGBTQ+ community, pushing back against the Vietnam War, and refusing to wear a bra on set as her way of resisting the system that had boxed her in. And even when she became sick, Elizabeth didn't want the world to know. She filmed her last movie, went home, and slipped away quietly just 8 weeks after her diagnosis. But before she left, she made one last mark. Her net worth was staggering. Her abandoned home became legend, and her influence on television and women's rights still lingers today. But that's only the beginning of her real story. And what comes next might just change how you remember her. Elizabeth Montgomery was born into Hollywood, but don't let the silver spoon fool you. Her childhood wasn't golden. She came into the world on April 15th, 1933, in Los Angeles, the daughter of film star Robert Montgomery and Broadway actress Elizabeth Allen. From the outside, the Montgomerys looked like the picture-perfect entertainment dynasty. But inside the family's grand homes and polished appearances was a storm of emotional neglect, quiet resentment, and a father whose love came with strings. Her father Robert was already a star by the time Elizabeth was born, and he wasn't shy about his opinions. He wanted a daughter who would be classy, quiet, and above all, invisible. Acting was his world, not hers. And even though he gave her small roles on his TV show later in life, he made it clear Elizabeth was never supposed to outshine him. Her mother, Elizabeth Allen, had already sacrificed her own Broadway career to support Robert's ambitions. That example was not lost on young Elizabeth, who grew up watching her mother shrink into the background while her father took the spotlight. She was taught early that a woman's success should never threaten a man's ego. But Elizabeth wasn't built for the background. As a teen, she tried to fit the mold. She attended elite schools, Westlake School for Girls in California, and the prestigious Spence School in New York, all part of her family's plan to steer her toward a refined, respectable future. But something inside her was itching for more. She wasn't content being a society girl. She wanted to act, to perform, to create a name of her own, not just live in the shadow of her famous father. So she made a bold move. Against her father's wishes, she enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in Manhattan. And just like that, Elizabeth Montgomery broke the first rule her father had laid out for her: stay out of Hollywood. He didn't like it. In fact, he openly criticized her work, even after she began getting positive reviews on stage and TV. Whenever she landed a role, he would send her letters filled with criticism, pointing out every misstep, never offering praise. It was cold, calculated, and devastating. Their relationship was more than just tense. It was emotionally punishing. And it didn't help that they were complete opposites. Robert was conservative, rigid, and believed in traditional gender roles. Elizabeth? Liberal, independent, and drawn to the counterculture of the 1960s. The political divide only deepened their distance, with every family gathering turning into a silent battlefield of disapproval and resentment. But despite the tension, or maybe because of it, Elizabeth pushed harder. Her need to prove herself wasn't just about fame. It was about breaking free from the icy grip of a father who wanted to clip her wings. And with each role she took, each stage she conquered, she wasn't just chasing stardom. She was reclaiming her identity. But her father's voice didn't go away. It would echo in her head for years, especially in matters of love. Elizabeth Montgomery's romantic life read like a script written in grief and rebellion. Her relationships weren't just love stories, they were acts of defiance. Each marriage, each man, was somehow a reflection of the fractured relationship she had with her father. Robert Montgomery may not have wanted her to be a star, but his cold, critical presence loomed over every choice she made, especially when it came to the men she allowed into her life. Her first marriage was textbook overcompensation. In 1954, Elizabeth tied the knot with socialite Frederick Cameron. He was respectable, charming, and most importantly, her father approved of him. On paper, it was the perfect match. But Elizabeth didn't want a quiet life in the suburbs. She had just graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and her ambition was burning bright. Meanwhile, Fred wanted a traditional wife, someone who would stay home, host dinner parties, and disappear behind the man. It was everything Elizabeth was running from. The marriage lasted less than a year, but her second choice was even more telling. In 1956, Elizabeth married actor Gig Young, a charismatic leading man with demons he kept tucked behind a smile. He was older, more experienced, and battling a secret addiction to alcohol. To some, it seemed romantic, a rising young star falling for a brooding Hollywood veteran. But underneath, it was chaos. Gig's alcoholism became a growing problem, and behind closed doors, the relationship turned toxic. While Elizabeth never spoke publicly about abuse, rumors swirled that Gig could be emotionally and verbally cruel during his darkest episodes. They were married for 8 turbulent years, but love was never truly part of the picture. For Elizabeth, it felt like she was chasing something, maybe her father's approval, maybe control, maybe just trying to prove she could fix someone. But the damage was adding up. By the time Elizabeth was cast in Bewitched, she was on the verge of yet another major transformation. Her marriage to Gig was collapsing, and her career was finally about to take off. She filed for divorce in 1963, the same year she met and married Bill Asher, a Hollywood producer who would become her next great love and her next major heartbreak. It's no coincidence that so many of Elizabeth's relationships mirrored the emotional tightrope she walked with her father. The need to feel loved, the instinct to rebel, the habit of choosing men who were emotionally unavailable or unstable, it all pointed back to the wounds Robert Montgomery left behind. And while Elizabeth was building a public image of poise and perfection, her private life was spiraling in slow motion. The camera loved her, but love itself kept slipping through her fingers. Unfortunately, things were only going to get more complicated. Because just as Elizabeth found success on Bewitched, she made a choice that would shatter everything. Her image, her marriage, and the hearts of fans who thought they knew her. To the outside world, Elizabeth Montgomery was the picture of domestic bliss. As Samantha Stevens on Bewitched, she was the ideal housewife, sweet, devoted, and a little bit magical. Week after week, audiences fell deeper in love with her wholesome charm and perfect on-screen marriage. But behind the scenes, Elizabeth's real-life romance was unraveling in the most scandalous way possible. And it all started with a man she wasn't married to. Elizabeth had married Bewitched producer Bill Asher in 1963, the same year the show began filming. At first, it seemed like a dream match. He helped her land the role that would define her career, and they became one of Hollywood's power couples, admired, respected, and envied. But fame has a price, and the constant pressure of working together, raising children, and living in the public, I started to chip away at their bond. Then came Richard Michaels. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't famous. He was a director hired to work on Bewitched during its later seasons. And from the moment he arrived on set, something shifted. The chemistry between Richard and Elizabeth was immediate, electric, and impossible to ignore. What started as friendly collaboration quickly spiraled into stolen glances, private conversations, and eventually a full-blown affair. At first, they tried to keep it under wraps, but it didn't take long for the cast and crew to notice the change. Elizabeth's demeanor softened around Richard. Her energy shifted. And Bill Asher? He could feel it. The set that once felt like home was suddenly thick with tension, and the whispers behind the scenes grew louder by the day. It wasn't just Elizabeth's marriage at risk. Richard Michaels was married too. When his wife found out about the affair, she filed for divorce. And in 1972, Bewitched aired its final episode just as Elizabeth's marriage to Bill Asher was falling apart. The timing was no coincidence. The wholesome image of Samantha Stevens had been shattered, and behind closed doors, everything was in pieces. Fans had no idea that the woman they saw waving her wand on screen was secretly burning her real-life fairy tale to the ground. But here's the twist. Bill Asher wasn't entirely innocent either. Rumors suggest he had been unfaithful for years, using his position in the industry to charm younger actresses and live out his own fantasies. Still, when it came to Elizabeth and Richard, it hit differently. Because this time, she was the one in love. And that kind of betrayal, it cuts deeper. Their marriage officially ended in 1973. And while Elizabeth and Richard continued their relationship for a time, they never married. The damage had already been done, not just to their partners, but to the legacy of Bewitched and the woman America thought they knew. But if you think the affair was the peak of her romantic chaos, you're in for another surprise. After the affair exploded, Elizabeth Montgomery didn't just lose her marriage, she lost the illusion of stability. Her image, once squeaky clean, had taken a hit. But what no one really saw was the emotional wreckage left behind. This wasn't just tabloid fodder. This was heartbreak layered on top of betrayal, built on years of trying to please men who always wanted more. Bill Asher had his own history of stepping out. Long before Elizabeth fell for Richard Michaels, Bill had quietly been pursuing relationships with other women. He was the kind of man who used charm like a weapon, and working in Hollywood gave him plenty of opportunities to indulge. According to insiders, he had affairs with younger actresses and production assistants, hiding behind his status as a beloved producer while his marriage crumbled behind the scenes. So when Elizabeth's heart shifted toward Richard, it wasn't just about lust or escape. It was emotional retaliation. She wasn't just running from Bill. She was falling into something that felt real, something she could control for once. Richard offered attention, affection, and validation, all the things she'd been quietly missing. And yet, the price of that connection was devastating. The media never picked up on the full story. To the public, Bewitched ended on a high note, and Elizabeth went on with her life. But in reality, everything changed after that final season. Elizabeth and Bill divorced in 1973, and while they remained somewhat civil for the sake of their children, the pain lingered. Bill would later admit in interviews that he never stopped loving her, even after all the betrayal, even after her heart moved on. In one especially raw moment, he confessed that his biggest regret was letting her go, that he knew he played a role in their downfall, that maybe, just maybe, he had taken her for granted. But by then, it was too late. And what about Elizabeth and Richard? After their whirlwind romance caused so much destruction, did they get there happily ever after? Not even close. Despite the intensity of their connection, Elizabeth and Richard Michaels never married. Their relationship fizzled out in the years following Bewitched, and by the time the dust settled, they had both moved on. The magic that had once sparked so fiercely faded just as quickly. And just like that, Elizabeth was alone again, bruised but never broken. But what's haunting is how much of her romantic chaos traced back to one source, her father. The emotional distance, the need for validation, the chase for affection from complicated men, it all echoed Robert Montgomery's cold shadow. And even as she tried to find peace, those early wounds kept whispering in the background. Still, Elizabeth wasn't done with love. She would continue to attract powerful, dangerous, and sometimes tragic men, all of them drawn to her beauty, her fame, and something deeper they couldn't quite explain. And what came next? Well, it might be the most scandalous chapter of all. Elizabeth Montgomery didn't just steal hearts on screen. She attracted some of the most powerful and complicated men of her time. But behind all the glamour and gossip was a woman caught in a cycle of romantic chaos, drawn to men who were either emotionally unavailable, battling demons, or both. Her beauty turned heads, but it also pulled her into relationships that left scars. One of the earliest rumors to swirl around Elizabeth was her friendship with President John F. Kennedy. The two reportedly grew close in the early 60s, and while neither ever confirmed an affair, Elizabeth never denied the whispers. JFK was known for his charm, and Elizabeth, glamorous, smart, and magnetic, was exactly his type. Whether the rumors were true or not, Their connection raised eyebrows and added a mysterious layer to her otherwise clean-cut image. Then there were the Hollywood legends. Dean Martin, Elvis Presley, Gary Cooper. They were all linked to her name at one point or another. And each man brought a different kind of trouble. Dean was charming but emotionally detached. Elvis was a superstar with his own tangled love life. Gary Cooper? He was much older, but when the two met on the set of The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell, sparks reportedly flew. Their on-set closeness stirred rumors of a secret fling, a May-December romance that had the crew talking. But Elizabeth didn't just flirt with fame, she got entangled with chaos. One of the darkest chapters came with her relationship with former ballet dancer Alexander Godunov. He was tall, talented, and devastatingly handsome, the kind of man who could sweep anyone off their feet. But behind the grace was a storm of self-destruction. Godunov struggled with alcohol and emotional instability. At first, Elizabeth believed she could help him, fix him, save him, but she couldn't. Their relationship turned volatile. Godunov's addiction spiraled, and his temper followed. Those close to Elizabeth said she tried to hold on, hoping her love would be enough, but it wasn't. The relationship eventually collapsed, and Godunov, unable to recover, continued down a path of self-destruction. He would later pass away after complications related to his addiction, a haunting reminder of how often Elizabeth's love stories ended in heartbreak. Why did she keep choosing these men? Some say it was her unresolved father issues, chasing love from men who mirrored the emotional coldness she grew up with. Others believe she was just trying to find someone who understood her, who could match her intensity without trying to control her. But whatever the reason, Elizabeth kept falling for the wrong men. Even as she aged, the pattern didn't stop. She continued to seek passion, even if it came with pain. And while the world saw her as confident and untouchable, inside she was still searching for love, for safety, and for someone who wouldn't try to dim her light. But one thing was certain, she was done pretending to play by the rules. By the final seasons of Bewitched, Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't just tired, she was quietly rebelling. The cheerful magic of Samantha Stevens had started to feel like a cage. 8 years of playing the same character, delivering the same spells, and smiling through the same domestic setups had worn her down. And while she was still beloved by fans behind the scenes, Elizabeth was growing restless. She was done playing nice, and she was about to show it in the most subtle but powerful way possible. She stopped wearing a bra on camera. In the context of 1960s and early 70s television, this was a bold, even radical move. Female TV stars were expected to look a certain way, polished, proper, and most of all, controlled. But Elizabeth? She was over it. Her choice to go braless wasn't just about comfort. It was about control. It was her personal protest against the system, the scripts, and the box she'd been shoved into. At first, no one on set dared say anything. After all, she was the star. But viewers noticed. Producers noticed. And Elizabeth didn't care. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a wardrobe malfunction. It was a message. And the message was simple: I'm not your good little housewife. Elizabeth's silent protest came at a time when second-wave feminism was gaining traction. Women were pushing back against the rigid expectations of marriage, motherhood, and media portrayals that made them feel invisible. While Bewitched may have been a fantasy sitcom, its themes cut deeper. Samantha was a woman with immense power, forced to hide it, downplay it, or suppress it just to fit into suburban life. And Elizabeth felt that in her bones. Even the storyline of Bewitched reflected this conflict. Samantha, a literal witch, had to constantly pretend to be ordinary to keep her mortal husband comfortable. Sound familiar? Elizabeth was living that very dynamic off-screen, and her frustration was beginning to show. ABC tried to keep her in the role. After season 5, they offered her more money, a lot more, to stay. And she agreed, but her enthusiasm had faded. She was showing up, saying her lines, and cashing her checks. But the spark? Gone. By season 8, she was done pretending she wanted to be there. And yet, she left with a brilliant move. While most actors walked away with memories, Elizabeth walked away with ownership. She had negotiated a 20% stake in the show's residuals. So when Bewitched went into syndication, Elizabeth didn't just make history, she made millions. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, calculated, and deeply personal. And it proved that even when she felt trapped in a role, Elizabeth still knew how to take back her power. But she wasn't finished making waves, because what she did off-screen next showed the world that Elizabeth Montgomery was far more than a TV, which she was a real-life warrior. While the world remembered her as the bubbly housewife who cast spells with a nose twitch, Elizabeth Montgomery was quietly building a second legacy. One that had nothing to do with Hollywood and everything to do with heart. Beneath the glamour, behind the fame, was a woman fiercely dedicated to making the world better for those who had been ignored, silenced, or pushed aside. And unlike most stars of her time, Elizabeth didn't just lend her name to causes, she put her soul into them. She was one of the first major celebrities to openly support the LGBTQ+ community, long before it became fashionable or safe in the industry. In 1992, just 3 years before her passing, Elizabeth served as Grand Marshal at the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade alongside her Bewitched co-star and close friend Dick Sargent. It wasn't just a friendly appearance, it was a public stance in an era when being associated with LGBTQ+ rights could still damage a career. And she didn't stop there. Elizabeth was also a vocal critic of the Vietnam War. She used her voice, literally, to narrate political documentaries that challenged American foreign policy. Her narration in Cover Up, behind the Iran-Contra affair and the Panama deception didn't just stir controversy, it sparked real conversations. The latter even went on to win an Academy Award. And while others in her position stayed quiet to protect their image, Elizabeth leaned into activism with the same conviction she brought to her roles. Then came the AIDS epidemic, a crisis that Hollywood, for too long, tried to pretend didn't exist. But Elizabeth didn't flinch. She became one of the earliest celebrity advocates for AIDS awareness and research, speaking out when others stayed silent. She used her platform to support people living with HIV and to challenge the shame and misinformation that surrounded the illness. Even in her final year of life, she refused to slow down. She volunteered with Learning Ally, a nonprofit that helped make educational materials accessible for those with disabilities. She recorded audiobooks, voiced public service announcements, and even dedicated time to help with children's literature. One of her last contributions was recording when we were very young, a tender gesture that showed just how deeply she cared. Her activism was never loud or performative. She didn't do it for headlines. She did it because she understood what it meant to be overlooked, misunderstood, and misrepresented. Maybe that came from a life spent fighting for her own voice. Maybe it came from empathy she had to learn the hard way. Either way, Elizabeth Montgomery was more than a beautiful face from an old sitcom. She was a woman who refused to be silent when it mattered most. But as she poured herself into helping others, something else was happening in the background, something far more personal. A quiet, devastating illness was creeping in, and she wouldn't catch it until it was already too late. For all her public strength, Elizabeth Montgomery's final chapter was heartbreakingly quiet. After decades of surviving Hollywood, heartbreak, and her own inner battles, she was finally in a place of peace. She had married for the 4th time, this time to actor Robert Foxworth, a man she loved deeply. They weren't a power couple or red carpet regulars. They were just two people who had found calm in each other. But life, once again, had other plans. In early 1995, Elizabeth began experiencing flu-like symptoms while filming the TV movie Deadline for Murder. At first, she brushed them off. She was 62, still working, still sharp, there was no reason to panic. But her discomfort didn't go away. And by the time doctors finally ran tests, the news was devastating. Colon cancer. And it had already spread to her liver. It was the kind of diagnosis that doesn't offer second chances. No major treatments. No miracle surgeries, just a countdown. Elizabeth made a choice. She wouldn't spend her last days in a hospital surrounded by machines. She returned to her Beverly Hills home, where she and Robert had built a quiet life. Surrounded by the people she loved most, she faced her final weeks with grace. There were no public statements, no tabloid spreads, just dignity, privacy, and a final retreat from the spotlight she had lived under for so long. On May 18th, 1995, just 1 month after her 62nd birthday, Elizabeth Montgomery passed away peacefully in her sleep. It had been only 8 weeks since her diagnosis. Her memorial service was held at the Cannon Theater in Beverly Hills, where loved ones, including her children, friends, and fans, gathered to honor her. Jazz legend Herbie Hancock played music in her memory. Her husband read aloud cards and letters from people whose lives she had touched. Even in passing, she inspired connection, love, and reflection. But her departure wasn't the end of her story. Not by a long shot. One of the most intriguing pieces of her legacy is the mysterious home she left behind, a 4-bedroom retreat in Agora Hills, California. Tucked into the Santa Monica Mountains, the home was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, With cabanas, a meditation balcony, antique chandeliers, and even a Moroccan-style lounge, it reflected Elizabeth's complex personality. Elegant, spiritual, and full of contradictions. After her death, the house sat empty for a time. Rumors swirled about its energy. Some said it felt haunted. Others believed it carried the peaceful aura of someone who had finally found rest. It was eventually sold and relisted over the years, fluctuating in price, but always regarded as a rare piece of Hollywood history. Elizabeth Montgomery may have left the stage, but the echoes of her life, the love, the scandal, the rebellion, the advocacy, lived on in every room of that house. And her true legacy? Well, that deserves one final moment to shine. Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't just a television star, she was a contradiction. A woman who lived in color during a black and white era. America fell in love with her as the quirky, magical Samantha Stevens, the suburban witch who could make anything happen with a twitch of her nose. But that lighthearted fantasy only scratched the surface. Beneath the smile and sparkle was a woman wrestling with the weight of legacy, heartbreak, and the constant tug-of-war between who she was and who the world wanted her to be. Her life was never simple. Born into privilege but starved of affection, Elizabeth carried the shadow of her emotionally distant father into every corner of her adult world. Her marriages, 4 of them, were often reflections of that early wound, filled with longing, conflict, and the desperate hope for approval she never truly received. Even her most famous romance with Bewitched producer Bill Asher ended in heartache and scandal. But through it all, Elizabeth never stopped evolving. She was a woman who defied expectations. She fought for control of her image in an era when women on TV were expected to be silent, agreeable, and decorative. She pushed back quietly, refusing to wear a bra on set, choosing not to renew her contract despite massive paychecks, and holding on to partial ownership of Bewitched, a financial move that earned her millions. Elizabeth knew her value long before Hollywood wanted her to. She also used her platform to uplift others. Long before it was safe or celebrated, she championed AIDS awareness, LGBTQ+ rights, women's empowerment, and anti-war activism. She didn't chase headlines for attention. She spoke out because it mattered to her, because she knew what it meant to feel powerless, and she refused to let others suffer in silence. Her legacy is more than syndication checks and reruns. It's in the bronze statue of Samantha in Salem, Massachusetts, a tribute not just to a fictional witch, but to a woman who helped normalize female strength on screen. It's in the young actresses who followed in her footsteps, refusing to shrink to fit the frame. It's in the people she fought for and the fans who still feel like they knew her, even if they only ever saw the TV version. Elizabeth Montgomery left behind more than just a net worth. She left a complicated, messy, brave story that deserves to be remembered in full. Not just the magic, but the pain, the rebellion, and the grace. Her beauty got her noticed. Her talent made her famous. But it was her resilience that made her unforgettable. So the next time you see that iconic nose twitch on a late-night rerun, remember this. Behind that charm was a woman who lived through storms, defied expectations, and never stopped searching for her truth. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.